Okay, good evening, everybody. I can see people are starting to come into this evening's webinar, so welcome. I am Shane Oley. I'm the race director of the Dragon's Back race and the Cape Wrath Ultra. Tonight, we have got what I suspect will be a fascinating conversation with Elanor Cormack and Vicky Begg about sports psychology. And I think anybody who is kind of sat there right now thinking about undertaking one of these big races, I mean, it actually doesn't even need to be one of our races, but one of these big endurance events, probably wants to be thinking about how they're going to mentally prepare as much as they want to physically prepare. And I think this evening's conversation will be great. I'm expecting to learn a lot. I'm looking forward to the next 90 minutes. Just a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to hand over to Elanor and Vicky to describe what they do, actually, because it's really quite specialist. So first of all, I'm coming from our event office in Kendal in Cumbria. My colleague Elanor, there's two Elanors on the call tonight. So Elanor is working from home. Thanks, Elanor. She's well, in Cumbria as well. And if you have any questions while we're talking, feel free to just put them straight in the chat. And what we'll do, we'll circle back to all those questions at the end. And very roughly, we're going to do about 60 minutes of conversation that I'm going to lead. Then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Elanor, who's going to introduce any of the questions that you've got for Elanor and Vicky this evening. And we will definitely be wrapped up within 90 minutes. We always work to 90 minutes. Sometimes we're a little sooner, but I'm very grateful for you kind of giving up the time this evening to join us. Vicky's camera's not working at the moment, but she can hear us and we can hear her. So I'd like to hand over to Elanor and Vicky at this point, and perhaps you can just give us the highlights of sports psychology and how that interplays with our events.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Just by way of introduction, I'm up in Perthshire, so sunny Perthshire today, which is lovely, in Scotland, which is any of you who haven't been up this way is a great way to be, place to be if you love hills. I can recommend it. So I'm a sport and exercise psychologist. So in terms of what that means, because sports psychology is something that people maybe don't go looking for yet. But as Shane's saying, if you're looking to physically prepare yourself, I would argue that the mental part is a massive part of that preparation. So essentially, what we're talking about is thinking about thinking, which sounds a little bit meta, but it's as simple as that. So it's about helping you to understand how you currently think and how that might impact on your performance and also your experience of events, and particularly where it's something like the Dragon's Back race or Cape Wrath, where these are long events where you're going to spend an awful lot of time with yourself in your own head, and so it can be really useful to understand what's going on in there before you get to the event. And ultimately, your brain determines everything else that happens in your body, everything that your muscles do, everything that your heart does. All of that is based on what your brain is telling it. So what we know is that the way that we think and the perspective that we have on situations impacts the performance of our body. So when you're talking about endurance events, small differences in terms of how you think can have long differences across days, and that'll add up. So I guess that's kind of, in a nutshell, what sports psychology is, such as it is. It need to be a very big nutshell, but yeah.
And perhaps Vicky could introduce kind of her approach from a kind of sports counselling perspective.
Yes, of course. My apologies that you can't see me. I have tried a couple of times, but such is the digital world that we work in. So I tend to think of my counselling approach to coaching and using sports psychology in coaching as it's very much a sort of person-centered approach, which isn't new from a coaching point of view. Lots of people would use a person-centered approach, but I tend to find that I'll work an awful lot more with people's feelings and emotions and the emotive side of their experiences than necessarily heading down a rabbit hole of metrics and numbers and I suppose the more traditional sort of format of what might be called periodization in coaching. You know, it's very much a let's work with who you are, what you're experiencing, and how you're feeling about what you're experiencing. So I'll quite often spend a lot of time working on how people feel about things and then investigating that and not just leaving it at, I feel fine. Because often the answer will be, I feel fine. So it's trying to get beyond fine and using the kind of counselling approach to work out what fine really means to an individual. And everybody's actually got different versions of what fine actually means.
I think, I'm going to say, first of all, we haven't actually mentioned the name of your business. So it's Fit Think. And my colleague Elanor is going to share a link into the chat for the participants. And you can read on the Dragon's Back website how that integrates with the Dragon's Back. So I think that's quite important to put that there. I'm going to declare a little bit of an interest here in that I actually had some sports psychology help. How long ago? Over 10 years ago. And it was incredibly helpful in terms of how I was approaching sport. And I'd got into a cycle of getting very fatigued, great training, good performance, followed by a long period of overtraining and poor performance. And I can honestly say that psychological expertise and external view, it's the outside looking in, was incredibly helpful. So I kind of had some sense of what a psychology session is like, but perhaps Elanor, you could describe what that session is like for everybody this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's a good question, because it's a big unknown for people when they've not been in that space. You know, people have this image of, I'll go into a room and I'll be, grilled, or I'll be told exactly what I have to do, and that's really not what it is, or it definitely shouldn't be. So the starting point is always about understanding your experience. So everybody on this call is an expert on themselves. I'm not an expert on you. I will never be an expert on you. That's not my role. My role is to understand what your current experience is and then explore, what does better look like? And that's always a question that I ask in a first session. For you, what does better look like? Because my assumptions may not be what you're actually looking to do. It might not be that you're trying to go faster. It might not be that you're trying to, improve your performance. It might be that you're trying to enjoy it more. And those are very different things. So that's always the starting point. And then there's different ways it can go. And that depends on the client's needs, so what they're looking for, but also preferences. Some people prefer to have more of a talking space where we collaboratively together explore what's going on. Other people really like having kind of things like homework, like to go away and work on something and come back and report what happened. So there's different ways to work, and there's a kind of continuum that we can work along on that, from really, just having really good conversations to, I'm going to give you bits of paper and you can go away and do things with that, and that can be around things like taking notes of the thoughts that you're having when you're doing your activity, and then we would look together at going, well, actually, which of those are helpful, what's the impact of those, how do we change those? That's at one end of the spectrum, and at the other would be that also kind of what Vicky's talking about as well, is that gaining a bit of a deeper understanding of yourself, and that in itself can be enough to help you to make change without it being a really deliberate move. So it involves a lot of talking. It generally involves quite relaxed, should be a nicely relaxed environment. I always say to clients, this is your space, it's not my space. It's really important that clients get to decide what direction we take things in. and also what direction we don't take things in. You know, so if clients have something you go, actually, I really don't want to talk about that, nobody's going to force you to talk about it. Or if there's something that we do that you go, I'm not too keen on that approach, absolutely fine. Well, we will not do that. There are multiple ways we can take things. So it's really that. It's a collaborative approach. I tend to use an awful lot of metaphors and analogies, and I just can't help myself. I'm all about buckets and balloons and things. But one of the ones that I use is about, effectively with clients, I'm sitting in the car with you, but you're driving. And I'm there to help with maybe some of the directions and some of the map reading and, you know, help to spot the signs on your journey towards whatever it is you want to be doing. But you're always the one driving. And you can stop the car and get out at any point, or, you know, you can tell me to get out. That's absolutely fine.
That's a really lovely analogy. Hey, so Vicky, why don't we do the next big step and go ask ourselves how that is going to help you prepare for something like Dragon's Back or Cape Wrath, or, as I said earlier, any of these big undertakings?
I think that the helping to prepare for a big event, if you're sort of investing your time in your thoughts and using psychology, it touches on what Elanor spoke about in a big way. You've got the sort of bettering yourself, growing in confidence, finding the best version of you that you can be for that experience. With an event that's across multiple days, you know, something that Elanor and I don't have an experience of, you are definitely the person who's got the greater experience of that type of outing or trip. So it's about investigating what you already know. So if you came to a session and you were chatting about what you already know, it's about building up that sort of sense of, what have I already got in my store that I can use to get me through this event? So you're building the confidence to be confident during that event, and you can then step up to the event in the knowledge that you've got a really nice full sort of armoury of stuff that you've already prepared in advance. The things that you don't know, to a certain degree, I would say don't worry about them, because you can't possibly know about all of the things that are going to happen to you on an event that's 5, 6, 7 days long. You can't possibly deal with all of those things. And there's always going to be somebody who might be better than you, faster than you, different to you. So it's about working out the best version of you for the event that you're actually preparing for. So you've got, I think you would refer to things like your smarter goals, your specificness, your realisticness, your achievableness, all the measures that you've got in terms of what a smarter set of goals are, because that traditional sort of look at your goals still exists and still can be really relevant in sports psychology. It's not like rocket science.
Mm-hmm. I think the best bit of advice I got during the sports psychology support I had was just being the best version of yourself on that day.
Yeah.
On that day. And that's the critical
at that
thing.
moment.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because it's obviously every day is different, and you know, you can only go out and do the best you can on that day. And like years later, I still remind myself of that. It's just really helpful. I've got a couple of questions here, and because I'm not, 100% knowledgeable about Eleanor's and Vicky's expertise, I think what I'm going to do is throw the questions out there, and then you can probably answer them best between yourselves, because you work as a team for Fit Think. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. So if we build up for our runners, our participants who are hoping to take part in one of these events, maybe in that first stage when they're going out training, is there something that they can do at that point which is helping not just to train the muscles but to train the mind?
Yeah, Vicky, will I go and you can add on?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think it's about thinking about what you're about to go and do, and not going, I'm preparing for a race and therefore I'll start thinking about how I think when I get to the race. It is very much that, well, as you say, you're preparing your muscles to do it. trying different things with the way that you think. So looking at different perspectives. So Shane, like your example of, being the best version of yourself on that day. That takes time and practice in the same way as other techniques would and other skills would. So during your training, you can be growing your awareness, your self-awareness of what do you think, what particular challenges do I have? Do I find certain things really difficult? Do I find certain things distracting, for example? Do I find my attention is in the wrong place at times? So maybe, going down scrabbly bits, do I start to have thoughts about worrying about falling and things like that? And you start to develop that kind of better understanding of what are all the thoughts that are popping into your head. And you can start to then work with, and this is kind of where, sports psychology comes in, you start to work and look at, well, actually, what's helpful at any given time. So worrying about falling is not an unhelpful thought, but it's an unhelpful thought at the point at which you're coming down some scree, because you're focusing on it going wrong rather than focusing on it going right. And we know that these are the things that lead to success or less success in terms of achievement. Because if you imagine yourself coming down the slope, you're worrying about falling, the first thing your brain's going to do is tense everything up. Which I'm not an ultra runner, but I know that does not make running easier. So it's these sorts of things. You start to develop that better self-awareness. The other thing you can do is plan into your training for things to go wrong. So don't train as if everything's going perfectly all the time. Your training won't go perfectly all the time. So that will be a nice replication of the race, because over these long races, you're not going to have everything going exactly to plan. It's just not going to happen. So if you only train for that eventuality, you haven't built up the skill set to deal with the things going wrong. So you could build that into your physical training of, actually, today I'm going to get myself a little bit lost, for example, or, today I'm going to run further than I need to, or even, tricking yourself a little bit into things like, well, maybe I'll try and not drink quite so much and then have to plan for around that. So you can put in things that would challenge your thinking so that you start to go, oh, I need to deal with that. So really practicing things like that. You can also build things in around, practicing relaxation. So across such long events, if you're constantly being attentive all the time, that's exhausting. And there'll be periods within the race and within your runs where you could bring in a little bit of mindfulness into your running. So actually really just being in that present moment, of your surroundings, rather than worrying about the next mile or worrying about what the next challenge is. And that lets your brain calm down for a little while, have a little bit of a rest before it then has to start thinking more strategically again. So you can build all these sorts of things into your training, as well as, if you are working on whether that's different ways of thinking or different self-talk, things like that, imagery, mental skills, you can practice them alongside it as well. So there's loads you could put in there. It's really about which ones make sense for you at that time. Yeah.
I think the main thing that I would add to that, because I'd written down quite a number of notes that were really quite similar to that, were about being really routine. So having your kind of routine, understanding your routine, but also practicing for being adaptable in your routine, which covers some of what Elanor said. And if you think about, a really simple example of that, if your routine is to prep your food in advance the night before and have it ready for getting up in the morning, that's just your let's say your normal daily rhythm or your normal daily routine. Let's say even outside of the Dragon's Back race, you like to have all your breakfast stuff ready, but that fails to happen for some reason the night before. And how much disarray does that throw you into at the start of that next day? So practicing those things can really help you to deal with being adaptable, as well as also knowing that if you've got your routine in place and you've literally written your routine down, or you've tapped it into your phone, or you've spoken it as a kind of voicemail or something like that to yourself, or recording to yourself. The act of actually forming that routine is really significant. I was reading recently about Mark Beaumont's routines, the sort of long distance cyclist, and his routines are, in my view, really brutal, but they are his routines, and they give him the reason to start. And once that's started, and that day is started, and the ball is rolling, and the routine is kicked off, it just happens. And he follows it through, and it gives them that reason to just keep going with it. So that routineness is an important sort of feature of a day, I suppose, or planning.
When I'm listening to that, I mean, it sounds fascinating and consistent with what I hear from other kind of athletes and runners. And I was thinking about how you can create that uncertainty when you've got a training plan. And I guess from personal experience, I think one of the best things you can do is to go out in poor weather, or go in the dark. And even if you're running something, a familiar route to yourself. And I'd also say to everyone listening tonight, obviously, within the context of your experience, for sure, because the mountains or trails can be very different places in bad weather, but that suddenly makes things different. And that can suddenly test you in ways you weren't expecting. I deliberately do that myself, just to kind of keep my things like my navigation on my best game by going out in bad weather. Okay, so that's really fascinating. So obviously your perspective as you approach a race, whether it's a positive or a negative perspective you have, is going to, I guess, impact on your performance. So perhaps we can explore that a little bit, kind of that kind of mindset before you even get there.
Yeah, of course. Shall I start on this one, Elanor?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'd sort of taken a kind of sort of spec on this, that quite often sort of, in a kind of counselling sort of arena or a counselling situation, you'll sort of look at the role that you play, and, for example, the kind of responsibilities and relationships that you have in that role. And if you think about what your perspective on an event is, if you've got a kind of challenge mindset, which is quite a positive mindset, or if you've got more of a kind of victim's mindset, which means that everything's going to be against you that day. You feel like luck is never on your side, and you're a bit of an Eeyore, in that situation. You're always plagued by bad luck. It's about looking at the role you play in a certain context. So I'll quite often chat to my clients about what their responsibility is to themselves, almost, and try to get them to look at how they behave and who they are in that environment. And it might be quite different in their sports environment to what they are, for example, at work, or the role they play with their family. So it's about trying to look at your perspective on things in the context that you're going to be performing, and working on that for the most positive outcome, so that, I don't know, if you look at yourself as being, maybe some of the sort of analogies that are drawn are, if you're always the parent, are you the one who's always in control? You're always in the lead, you're always taking the lead, you know exactly what's happening. Great, you're going to probably have a fairly decent day out, you're going to know what's happening. Or are you simply the child in that situation, and you're always waiting for people to give you instruction? You go out on runs with other people and they always lead you. So therefore, when you're out on race day and you have to deal with all of this on your own, how do you behave? Do you behave like the child? Are you not willing to take on that responsibility? So it's really about facing up to your version of who you are in that situation. Don't know if that's helpful.
It's really good.
Yeah, and I think sort of building on that and the idea of challenge mindset. So there's a theory that has lots of lovely research backing it up about theory of challenge and threat states. And what we know is that if you can put yourself into the so-called challenge mindset as opposed to the threat mindset, your body physically performs better. So the blood vessels open a little bit more, you get more blood flow, your heart rate will increase appropriately better. So effectively your muscles are getting more blood flow to them, things like that. And they can show performance improvements, even on small tasks with this. So the question then is, well, what's the difference? How do you get from one to the other? And there are three things that make it up, basically. It's a nice one. And I'll throw another metaphor in for you. So buckets, okay? So I've got two buckets. And effectively it's about the balance between your bucket, which is what you perceive to be the demands of the situation. Okay, so the demands of the race. How demanding is the race? What's it going to ask of you? And the other bucket is the resources that you believe you have to meet those demands. And it's all about balance. So you want your resources bucket to be much heavier than the demand bucket. Now, the beauty of this that is all about your perceptions of the demands and your perceptions of the resources. So we can bolster the resources bucket and we can reduce your perception of the impact of demands. Okay, with me so far? Mm-hmm. And so you've got your buckets. And the three things that do that, one is looking at your self-efficacy. So that's your ability to take control in the situation, your ability to achieve, rather than take control, your ability to achieve what you're trying to do. So can I actually go out and run this race? Can I actually get myself organized at the start line? These sorts of things. So for that, you're looking back at reminding yourself about the training you've done. You might remind yourself of some really good specific bits of your training or previous events where you did well. So almost having a little highlights reel for yourself. So things like that to help you to feel that actually I can do this. So self-efficacy isn't exactly confidence, but it's close. It sits in that area. The second thing to help with the buckets is control. So focusing in on what you can control, helping you to feel more in control of the situation. So you're not making yourself in more control, but you're focusing on the bits that you do have control over. So weather, absolute classic one. You could spend the morning of the race, day one or day two or whichever day, complaining about the weather and saying, oh, it's going to be really windy, it's going to be cold, it's going to be too hot, da, 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 da. None of us on this call, I can guarantee, have the ability to change the weather. So if you're focusing on the weather not being optimal for you, what you're doing is putting things into the demand bucket. Yeah. If instead you note the weather and you say, that's okay, I might need to hydrate a wee bit more if it's hotter, or I'm going to take some extra nutrition with me, or I'm going to make sure I've got my right kit for when it gets rainy or windy, or, which you would be doing anyway, but you say to yourself, remind yourself you're doing that. That's you putting content into the resources bucket. So you're not ignoring the weather, but you're recognizing it's not a controllable. I can do something to deal with that. I have the resources to deal with that. So that's your second one. The third thing you want to do is to focus on it's called an achievement goal focus. So you're focusing on what you could potentially gain from the situation, not what you could potentially lose. So you're focusing on the things that you might get out of having a good race, having a good day, getting up the next hill, whatever it is, at whatever stage. And I would suggest, because, we're talking endurance events, you probably want to break it down a little bit. But really focusing on all the things you could achieve, as opposed to, oh, if I don't manage to do this, people will think less of me, or, I'll have invested all that time into training, and if I don't manage to finish the race, that'll be terrible. All of that, one, it wouldn't be terrible, because that's irrational thinking. And two, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're focusing on what you could lose, as opposed to, if I manage to finish this, I'll feel great about myself. What an achievement. all these sorts of things. Or, you know, if I manage to get in the top, you know, if you've got aspirations to get into the, you know, whatever it is, top 10, top 50, you know, then focusing on that. And those three things, so your self-confidence, self-efficacy, your the things you can control, and focusing on what you can achieve. Those are the three things that will tip you from being in a threat mindset to being in a challenge mindset. And those are things everybody can do. And it's identifying what it is that will help you to do that. So, you know, writing down, almost saying, actually, what is in my resources bucket? Can I make a list of all the things that I've got that are going to help me to do this? You know, and I love a picture, so I'd be drawing a bucket, you know, and filling it and all sorts. I might have a physical bucket if I'm in the room, we'll put things in it. But really it brings it to life for you, and it really starts to embed it into your brain so that it's then going, oh, I know this. I know I have this bucket full of resources. And then the demands, then the perception of them become smaller and smaller.
That's a really fantastic answer. And I think over the last, well, it's been this year we've been doing these webinars. It's been such a pleasure to talk to experts like yourselves and others, and just the richness of the experience and advice that we're able to gather and share. It's really fascinating. So I think I'm gonna move on to the next question, which I think probably a lot of participants struggle with, and that is their confidence and the kind of self-doubt about whether they can actually do this. And certainly, you know, when I talk to potential participants and I talk to, you know, runners and, you know, participants on the start line the day before, all of these things, they all carry a degree of self-doubt. And I guess a little bit of that is natural and normal, but I guess too much is an inhibitor as well. So how can potential participants kind of deal with that stress?
Do you want me to start? I'll start.
You start, go for it.
Yeah, I'll start on that one. So some of the things that Elanor actually described in her previous answer are a really good starting point for that. And one of the things that I'd sort of thought about with reference to this again, so confidence is it's a really interesting thing because it is made up out of lots of different aspects. Self-efficacy was mentioned, and your belief in yourself, your belief in yourself to actually do the things you think you can do, your skill sets. You know, so you've got sort of both physical and emotional sort of capacity there that sort of build up what your confidence actually is, and it means different things to different people. And I thought about the sort of idea of kind of how you best, for example, score yourself. So you might want to do things like, yes, you've got your bucket of good stuff and your less full bucket of not so good stuff, and it's like, how do you score yourself on those things? So a little bit of profiling might help, you know, a little bit of performance profiling might help with that. What kind of scores do you hold for yourself on the areas that you think you need to be good at? So if you feel as though your fitness level is really good, you know, you give yourself a high score on that one. If you feel as though your map reading skills are not so good, then you're already sort of starting to build up a picture of your scoring there. You might, for example, feel as though I don't know, even something like your emotional stability when you're tired is really an area where you need to sort of focus a little bit of your attention. So if you're giving yourself a low score there, what can you do and how can you shift the balance between, let's say, the low score at one end to a higher score at the other end of your kind of profile and your profiling of your performance? I suppose in terms of how you actually do that, you've actually got to put yourself in those positions and deal with it on the days that you're out training, which again is something that we've kind of mentioned, and you've mentioned it as well, Shane, where you put yourself in those positions and you think, okay, I've had a really bad sleepless night here. what does that feel like? Is it a total disaster? Am I okay with it, dealing with it and moving on to the next day? And can I, for example, take some cat naps throughout the day, 20-minute cat naps, and that makes me feel better? Does that improve your score? Does that give you the ability to move forwards a little bit and build on that confidence, throughout your training process?
Yeah, I just kind of building on that, I would definitely agree. It's I think people quite often say, oh, my confidence is low, as if it's one thing.
Mm.
And it's not one thing. It's a feeling that comes from lots of different things. And it is exactly that Vicky was saying, of identifying what are all the areas that you could be confident in and how do you boost them. And I, in my world of metaphors, talk about balloons.
Jars.
I know, I can't help myself. So we have confidence balloons, and how do we inflate them? And if one's low, can we inflate another one? And that might be okay. So you're not going to be confident in all areas all of the time. You will have this kind of up and down in terms of some balloons going up and down. And that's okay, as long as you maintain a kind of optimal level across the board. So you go, well, actually, maybe I'm not as confident with the navigation on this bit, but I'm really confident in the pace that I can go with. Right, okay, well, I'll bring those two together and just balance my pace so that it matches my navigation today, because it's a tricky bit of the race. And things like that. And just, yeah, I think actually addressing it. People sometimes view confidence as something that happens. I'm either confident or I'm not. And it's nothing I can do anything about. I just feel that way. And if we go back to the things we can control, well, actually, it is one of the things we can have some control over. We can take actions to do that. And one of the ways that we do draw self-efficacy and confidence is from previous experience, either real or imagined. So we can bring in things like imagery into that as well. So if you're going to go and do something that you've never done before, that you're not going to have the chance to do before, you can work on using imagery to imagine yourself doing it. Our brains are clever, but they're also sometimes a bit daft, and we can trick it into thinking that we've done something by really high quality imagery. So we can imagine ourselves being confident, ascending the bit that we're struggling with, or, whatever it is, or just, imagine ourselves feeling confident, running, at ease, feeling relaxed, all these sorts of things. And what you're doing is convincing your brain that it's done this before, and therefore it should be able to do it again.
Yeah.
And it's something that, athletes will use all the time to practice. They'll use it, for example, when they're injured. So if you have an injury and you can't go out running, you can still use imagery to trick your body into thinking it's running. And it's just about as effective. So you can use things like that to kind of bolster some of those, inflate some of those balloons. So it's not something to just think, I'm not confident, that it's one thing that I can do nothing about. It's all these little things that we can tweak and we can adjust a little bit. But I would still say, when you're going into an unknown, so if you've never done it before, if you've never done one of these races before, you will be nervous probably at the start, and that's totally normal and fine. And don't see that as a problem. You can start to say, well, actually, nerves are how I know I'm ready for this. Nerves show me that I care about what I'm about to do. All of these sorts of things. And that's reframing the nerves, as opposed to, oh God, I'm so nervous this morning. And it's just these little tweaks that your body then goes, oh, okay, so we're okay with feeling nervous. All right, okay, well, I'll just crack on then.
Yeah. I think I'm going to add to Eleanor's point there about imagery. And she was describing this sort of idea of you've got your actual experiences that you've had yourself. You've got these vicarious images that you can sort of create in your imagination, and then you can also literally look at people who are in your sphere and who are in your realm of similar ability. Literally looking at those people and knowing that those people are of a similar ability to you. So it might be somebody that you've trained with, or you think has, done a race, but you don't necessarily know them, but it's been the same race that you've been in before, and you can check out some information about them, or you can see a video online of them, and using all those things that are so available to us these days on YouTube or whatever else. It's and all the wonderful stuff, for example, that Elanor puts up on your marketing. There's loads of really nice things. It's like seeing yourself doing those things and being a part of that can really help with that sensation of, yeah, I'm just like them. I can do that. I'm like those people. And why shouldn't I just be part of that gang and join in with it? It's really, really useful sort of method of imagery and creating a visual picture.
Yeah, these are really fascinating. I feel like I'm having a little sports psychology session myself, listening to all of this. It's great.
Great.
So Dragon's Back, Cape Wrath, and other events, they are long. It's day after day after day. We all know we're going to have a low point at some point during those hours spent on the hill. So I guess I was looking for some top tips for kind of lifting yourself out of those low moments when everything's sore and you're hungry and you just want to have a hot shower and go sleep in your own bed, whatever it might be. So have you got some suggestions for how participants can help themselves in those moments?
Yeah, so I go for this one, Vicky.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and I think the first thing to do is to recognise they'll happen and that they're not bad. You're not going to spend 5, 6, 7 days feeling really bouncy and motivated and woo, let's do this, guys. Yeah, that's not the reality of what's going to happen. And if it is, I'd like a word. So it's kind of recognizing first that they will happen and that that's okay, and then planning for actually what am I going to do when that happens. And then you're starting to think about, do you actually know why you're running the race? Have you actually sat down yourself and gone, why am I doing this? And I would encourage you not to take your first answer. Okay. So it can be quite a nice exercise. Sit down with a bit of paper and ask yourself, why am I doing the race? Write your first answer. Then ask yourself, why is that important? And see what the answer to that is. And then even, why is that important? Okay. And what you're doing is drilling down to actually what is the real motivator for you. And sometimes you'll get to things like, actually I want to be a role model to my children, maybe something like that. Or I want to be a leader for other people like me, or I want to prove to myself that I'm that I'm able to achieve these sorts of things and go outside my comfort zone. These types of things. Once you get into that kind of zone, you're starting to starting to get close to what your motivator actually is. Once you know what that is, that's what you pull up in those moments when you're like, oh, as Shane said, I just want a shower and a bed. That's when you go, okay, it's okay that I want a shower and a bed, but remember why you're doing this. You're doing this because of whatever it is. And have even a wee bit of mental imagery that can pop in there to remind you of what does that actually look like, maybe. So if it is, like taking the example, if it's you're doing it to show your children, well, actually, think of your children. And I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but if that is your motivator, then that's the thing that keeps you going. And you go, okay, for the next mile, I'm just putting one foot in front of the other and I'll keep going and we'll see what I see. And things will gradually start to build back up, and then you'll start to feel a bit better and you'll start to get going again. So it's that importance of just keeping going in those moments, but coming back and reminding yourself of, why am I doing this? But the number of people that enter things and don't actually know why they've entered it, really, I've entered it because I like a challenge. Why do you like a challenge? Would be my first question. Yeah. It's these sorts of things of have a conversation with yourself as to, why am I really doing this? And that's what you hold in your head when you're doing that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Vicky?
Oh, honestly, I'd written some of the exact same things down.
That's lucky.
Yeah, and I would add to that by referring back to the routine and the plan that I'd suggested at the sort of earlier point in the conversation. Now, it takes time to sort of build up your plan for your race or your day. It might be something that you do actually just create in your head, but for others it might be something that is literally written down, that's literally got sort of points on the day. You might wear an armband, you might write things on your hand, you might have your phone with you all day, and you like to refer to things for each part of the day that keep you motivated. The distribution of your time and the distribution of your effort is really important, and not seeing the whole day as being exactly the same effort is really important as well, because there's very few occasions in life when we can, as Elanor had suggested, maintain that same level of upness. Yeah, we're all good, we're all up all the time. You think about your work day, you turn around and complain to your workmates that you're bored at whatever point in the day that you usually get bored at, or you flump home from work at the end of the evening and all you want to do is sit down and rest. So that's going to happen to you on your event and during your event days. So allowing for that in your plan is really important, including mini targets, actual targets. I don't know, even if I noted a sort of thing down, like I'm a really hungry racer or a hungry participant in anything. I'm always hungry. So looking forward to meals, snacks, and every part of eating that goes on during the day would really matter to me, I think, if I was doing such a long event. So use those things as your motivators. When are you getting to your next meal stop? And what are you going to enjoy when you get there?
Yeah, I certainly use some food as a big thing to help lift me. And I actually like to bring, just one or two treats that are not kind of fancy, gels, but they're like, I don't know, like a mince pie or something left field like that, which I'll really enjoy.
Totally, yeah.
And I think it could.
Sorry, I was going to say, mine was your finish line. What's your finish line going to look like as well? That was another one for me, which kind of goes in with Eleanor's. What's your initial motivator, and what's your finish line? What are those aspects of your event actually going to look like? And working on like imagery that relates to your finish line experience. You might come over the finish line like in a total heap, which is fine. I would still be really proud of myself if I came over the finish line in a total heap. But it's like, put that in place in your plan.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think a good phrase to have in your head for a bit of self-talk in those moments is just, what's next? So, yes, I'm in this moment and I'm feeling a bit down, but what's next? What's the next thing I'm doing? If you just keep asking yourself that, then you'll find that you're moving. All right, what's next? Right, I'm going to go up there. I'm going to go down there. That sort of thing.
Totally.
I'm going to eat my mince pie.
Totally.
So we've really focused on the kind of the running or the being out on the course. I mean, actually, a lot of our participants are walking and they're jogging. It's not all run, but we've been talking about the course. And I think for Dragon's Back and Cape Wrath Ultra, these are stage races. And I think sometimes the participants, they underestimate actually what they're going to do and how they're going to manage themselves at the overnight camps. I certainly know from talking to some of the winners over the years, they've described that the race carries on. It's just you're not running, but you're organising yourself, you're recovering, you're still in race mode when you're in the overnight camp. And maybe that's a little bit extreme for most people, but perhaps we could just think about how to approach that overnight camp and how, I guess a positive approach can help.
Shall I go?
Yeah, on you go.
Sorry. Vicky was quiet then. I think, it will depend on what performance level you're at, absolutely. And it's about matching that to you. But number one thing is get rest. Sleep is good for everything. That's just a fact. Your brain works better. If your brain works, your body works, But what I would suggest is that everybody does a really short debrief with themselves at the end of each day. So get in, get your fuel on board, get these things out the way first, and then give yourself a little structured debrief. So my suggestion would be, what 3 things went well today? What 1 thing do I want to work on or improve for the next day? And then off the back of that, set yourself what we call a process goal for the next day. And a process goal is different to a kind of outcome goal, which is a process goal is about what are you actually going to do. So not what you're wanting to achieve, but what you're actually going to do about it. So, depending on what it is, it might be, well, I'm going to change the way that the points at which I take on fuel, or I'm going to remind myself, of why I'm doing this every so often, or I'm going to stop and take in the view, or whatever it is. But it's something that you can actually definitely do. It doesn't rely on people around about you. It's not about getting ahead of other people or anything like that. It's about what you're actually going to do. And once you've done that, I would say that's it. The previous day is done. You've learned from it what you needed to learn from it. You just park it. You can go back once you've finished the race and review and, maybe spend more time with it. But in that overnight camp point, you don't want to be spending too much time sort of ruminating on what's happened. So you might have had a great day. You might have had a terrible day. You might have had something in the middle. It doesn't actually matter because that day has finished. It's now done. You've made it to, your overnight spot. So you want to quickly learn from that. Have the 3 good things that have happened will help you to boost your confidence for the next day. And just 1 thing to learn from it is enough. You don't want to be doing too much with it. So as I would say, and then you just say, right, day's done. Well done. I've made it to this point. Tick. The other things I would suggest thinking about putting in to your kind of processes, and I suspect Vicky would kind of pick up on this as well, is things like building in a wee bit of mindfulness or a bit of progressive muscle relaxation before you go to sleep. Because albeit you're going to be tired, that doesn't necessarily mean your brain can turn off. There's nothing worse than lying in bed going, I need to sleep, I should be asleep. And actually just doing a little bit of that can help just to relax you into getting the sleep when you have the time to get it. Yeah. And that's something, again, to practice beforehand. So don't just go, I'm going to start doing mindfulness on the end of day 1.
On the event.
Yeah. How do I do like that? So yeah, you can practice that. Or as I say, progressive muscle relaxation works really well as well, just to, calm everything down, calms your body down, but actually calms your brain down at the same time.
Yeah, those are great points, and I'd used a bunch of R's for this, if you like using letters as in lists. I had, recover, rest, and recharge all kind of fitted together, depending on which word you actually like. And literally, I'd written within that you and your digital devices. My goodness, because we love our digital devices these days. So you on both sides of the camp there, I was thinking, take time away from your digital devices, but also if they're important to you, get them recharged, because I know that that's something that's available at the camp, and being organised enough to actually put that in place. Then there was sort of regroup yourself. You can do that by speaking to other people. You can think about what other people have done on the day, hear what they've done, so that you're almost in some way taking yourself out of yourself and not having to focus entirely on you. If you're working, if there's other people that you've seen throughout the day, chat to them. I definitely had review in there, which is what Elanor was talking about, the review of your day. And then next to that, I had refocus, which again is what Elanor was talking about with the how you're going to restart your next day, and what's that going to look like. And then also refer back to your routine, because you've already got your kind of routine, hopefully, in place, and that gets you moving again the next day. If it's I don't know what time you guys all get up in the morning for these events. If it's a 5 a.m. start or a whatever a.m. start, get up, and that's you. You've got the ball rolling because you've kicked off that sort of first part. one of the other things I'd sort of thought about in this area was along the lines of, what are your nighttime demons? You might have daytime demons, you might have nighttime demons. Trying to sort of work out what the problem is might be a bit much at nighttime, because at nighttime things get really sort of blown out of proportion. So my sort of thoughts behind that were literally just to get up, take yourself out of that dream state, get up, maybe listen to some music. If there's anybody who can listen to you nearby, have a chat with them, have a quick chat with somebody, just to try and get some of that out and relax yourself a little bit. But the sort of nighttime scale of emotion can sometimes be, I think, overwhelming. So try to deal with that before it becomes something that's too irrational.
Mm. So when Vicky, you just talked about your routine there, and I know having seen a decade's worth of participants at these events now, that what the military call as personal admin is really important, and the participants that consistently do well have good personal admin, to the point that some of them even have a checklist. They get to the overnight camp, and they go through their checklist: dry my feet, eat my food, put dry clothes on, pack the bag for tomorrow. And I guess that just reinforces the routine.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really useful tip, because when you're at home and thinking about this, you're doing it with your brain as it normally is. You're going to be, at the end of, first day, second day, whatever, a very, very tired brain. So, albeit you're saying, a checklist that, remember to put dry clothes on. Well, actually, if you're absolutely exhausted, you may well forget to do them. So having a checklist just removes the need to remember the things you need to remember. And it's a really simple way of making that easier for you. And you can build in to that have I done my review, have I, decided what I'm going to do tomorrow, and all that. You can have that on there as well. And it just, again, it's planning for the condition you're going to be in, or the state you're going to be in at that point, which is probably fatigued. If you're not, then that's really impressive.
Everyone's fatigued.
I was going to say, I'm imagining everybody gets to the end of it, and that's going to build as the days build as well. So, having into the first thing you get into camp is I get my checklist out and it tells me eat. Right, okay, I'll do that, and I think that's a really helpful way of doing it.
That's great. One of the things, so some of the other partners we work with, Raw Adventure do the recce's, Paul at Missing Link, and we were talking with them recently about the participants that go on the recce's or go on the training programs that become successful at Dragon's Back, go on to be successful. And the one thing that comes up again and again and again is consistency and commitment to training. So the people who have, a good period of time out from the event, and that's different depending on where you are as an athlete at the start, but the ones who apply themselves consistently to training just consistently do better. It's not a mystery, this. But I think we've all been there when your training's not consistent and you're struggling to find that, rhythm to your training. And it can be hard to get that sometimes. We've all got busy lives. So I guess I'm asking, how can a sports psychologist help you get into that routine of regular training and effective training?
Vicky, do you want
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the first things I tend to I'd written down some notes about this myself, and it was to do with actually understanding what training is, and the practice element of training and why we train, and while people who are new to the event won't have all of that experience, it's partly their responsibility as part of the process to learn about their training and to begin to understand the importance of the training. So it gets to be a kind of responsibility, a sort of continuum whereby you build on it, and your habits become like a lifestyle sort of a thing almost, where the physical and mental blend of training, not only your body, but your mind, really sort of work together to give you as much potential and as much opportunity during the event as possible. You know, it's like, what is your training about? Unless you're repeating what you're doing and practicing the right things, what's the point in the training? And if your training isn't in some way replicating what's going to happen in the events, what's the point of the training? So it's about that specificity of training, and making sure that as much as you can, and I appreciate that everybody does have busy lives, but as much as you can, training with specificity in mind really, really matters. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I guess I would just add, from a kind of psychologist perspective, around self-compassion in those moments. So, you know, my training's not going quite right and it's a bit disrupted and I've had a busy week at work and, you know, what have you. What you don't need to do is to beat yourself up about that, because that's not going to help in any way. So, you know, it's thinking about, well, actually, okay, so I've not had the best week. How am I going to, you know, pick this back up and get back into my rhythm? And, you know, maybe are there things I need to adjust a bit around timings or how I'm trying to fit things in? And, you know, the real logistical aspects of it. Is there something that's a barrier? Or is it that, you know, I haven't actually thought about why I'm doing it? So we're back to that motivation again. You know, is it that there's something stopping me getting up for the run before work, or the, you know, going out on the wet days, or going quite as far as I planned, or whatever it is? You know, actually digging in there a bit and saying, is there a reason why I'm not doing that? Or is it simply a logistics issue, or I'm just not quite as fit as I wanted to be at this stage, or, you know, that. But ultimately, dealing with the reality of the situation with compassion, you know, so thinking about how would you speak to somebody else if they came to you and said that they were struggling with it? Would you say to them, Molly, you're just being rubbish, come on, get out there, do better? Or would you say, that's okay, let's, you know, plan from here, you know, let's see what we can do, and really applying that to yourself, because we are very, very good at beating ourselves up about not managing to do as much or as well as we wanted to do. And ultimately, that's not going to motivate you to get out the next time. So yeah, that's what I would kind of add in is, you know, remember that what you're doing is not easy. You know, and for a lot of you, that will be why you are doing it. So remind yourself of that and go, oh, this wasn't meant to be easy. So if I'm expecting it to be easy, then hang on, I need to have a word with myself, you know, and coming at it there. So it's not easy. So I won't have, yes, I'm aiming for consistency, but I also recognise that not every week is going to be absolutely consistent, and that's okay. But I'm trying to get as close to it as possible. So almost, I sometimes talk to clients who have sort of perfectionist leanings about looking at scales of perfection. And, you know, ultimately, if perfection's at the top, you know, 10 out of 10, then recognising that actually the chances of getting there in whatever it is, so in sport or in training program, whatever, you know, chances of getting perfection all the time are really, really small. So rather than always trying to aim to get to perfection, and actually what you end up doing then is you kind of bounce about, is then working out for you, where's my zone of acceptability, or where's the zone I'm happy in, and it's maybe kind of here. So maybe I'm happy if I get between 7 and 8 out of 10 of what I'm trying to do. And if you can do that, and occasionally I might get a 9, or I might, in exceptional circumstances, get a 10, but I will more consistently be in that 7-8 zone, rather than what tends to happen is if we're constantly aiming for perfection, we might bounce to a 5 and then to a 9 and then back down to a 6, and that's not consistent. Whereas if you're able to say, well, you know what, yes, I'm still aiming for the top, you know, I'm aspiring towards the top, but I'm happy if I'm in that, you know, whatever your zone is, an 80% zone, or, you know, something like that. I'm okay with that. That's okay. That's good. Then what happens is that you do sit more within that zone rather than bouncing about. So if your training is consistently 80% of perfection, that's going to be pretty good, as opposed to 1 week being 90%, but the next week being 50%, and that sort of thing. So there's a mindset aspect to that as well, in terms of, not viewing 80% as being bad.
Yeah.
That 80% is actually very good, and very good is probably enough.
Yeah.
I think just like totally reflecting on how my training works. I have a busy week at work. I do less training. I feel stressed at work, and I decide I'm not going to train tonight. I'm going to have gin and tonic, or whatever it might be. But you see those fluctuations, don't you? And that's and trying to find the consistency. And whilst I'm not a coach, what I understand about endurance training more than any training is its consistency, its slow adaptation over long periods that brings success. And I guess that's what we're looking for here, and how a stable psychological approach to your training expectations kind of facilitates that.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a really fascinating session. I'm having a great time.
I hope everybody else has enjoyed it.
I hope so too. The next thing I was going to ask about is Dragon's Back Cape Wrath again. They are very long events. Dragon's Back 6 days, Cape Wrath is 8 days. Sometimes people, by luck or desire, or luck or chance, they end up. Sorry, I'm using the wrong words. They end up in a group, and they'll spend a lot of time with a group of people during those events. But at other times, people are going to be out on their own, maybe for long periods of time in the hills. And I just wondered if you can, I guess, talk about, I guess, being comfortable in your own space on the hills. And it might even be this is more relevant to training for people.
It's certainly something that you can practice in training, and being okay with being in your own space. And that's where, kind of right at the start, we were talking about, sports psychology bringing a increased level of self-awareness. And that's where that can be really important. So you start to, if you've got that increased level of self-awareness about the way that I think about, well, when I start to go down that rabbit hole in my thoughts, I know that's not helpful. Once you know that that's the case, you could catch yourself before you're, away down the rabbit hole. It's that sort of thing. But I would also say, just a lot of self-talk. A lot of our self-talk is what kind of balances us. And by that, for anybody who's not aware, that's essentially everything you say to yourself, either out loud or in your head. And that has such an impact on the way we feel about things, where we focus, all sorts of things. So if you are on your own, pay attention to what you're saying to yourself. And some of that might be related to your performance and how you're doing, and some of it might be motivational about keeping going and what's next and all these sorts of things. Some of it might be about the environment you're in and really enjoying the experience. And so it could be something like, it's okay to stop here and enjoy the view for 5 minutes, and actually saying that to yourself and having amazing quiet moments where you are the only one in that space. And particularly for people who live in more urban environments, that's not something you get all the time, very often. So actually taking pleasure in being in your own space and being alone, rather than worrying about it, or wishing you were with other people, saying, well, I will be with other people later and that'll be good too, but right now, actually, this is me taking on Wales, or taking on Cape Wrath myself, go me, and really sort of having it as that kind of empowering experience to do that. But I would encourage people to, if you are somebody who does a lot of training with a group, go out and do some on your own, because it is a different experience. And kind of what Vicky was saying earlier about the type of person you are within the group, that can be quite different when you're then on your own, being able to cope with that. So get comfortable with yourself and be okay about being in your own head, but also understand what's going on in there. And that's the bit that you kind of want to do beforehand. Not wait until you're on your own in the middle of nowhere.
I'd written some really similar things again on that one, and because we discussed some of these sort of questions and the thoughts and process and things, and I think that practicing how you want to be each day is a sort of interesting concept. I think that people might not necessarily have thought of. Do you want to be a certain kind of person on a certain day? What's your mindset on that day? Are you starting off with a nice positive mindset? Are you welcoming everything? Are you enjoying things? Or is it your general approach to sort of go into things and feel as though you're under attack? And that's how you start your day, and therefore that's how the rest of the day is going to be. So really notice, as Eleanor's describing, notice yourself, notice what you're like, how you behave in certain situations, and whether or not you feel under threat. Admit your habits. Yeah, admit some of your habits to yourself. Even if the conversations that you maybe have with yourself during that admission are quite uncomfortable, just go with it. Admit the fact that you're maybe, not so good at, I don't know, I would definitely have to say I'm not so good at like navigation. And I'd have to admit I would actually be terrified of that, and I would be then annoyed with myself. So that would be my place to start that conversation in terms of my training and how I would sort of think about what I need to train for. Because the conversation I'm having with myself would be, oh my God, my navigation's not that great. This is where I'm going to fall down. So let's start in that place. I did also write a little note about trying to reduce gadget time and reducing online stuff, because we're so involved in that, especially if we work in office-based environments. Much as you might have your watch or your phone or whatever with you, trying to reduce some of that gadget time and introducing mindfulness, noticing games, tasks for every 5k, little targets along the way. I'm going to that next tree, so that tree is going to be where I'm heading for, and that's my company. That's where I'm going. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Maybe I'll invite Aria Eleanor back into this conversation, because I know there's a couple of questions that have come in. I've also got a couple of questions that I think I might bring in later, but I think the people who are kind of watching us tonight, why don't we answer some of theirs?
Yeah. So one question that's come up that I can personally relate to a lot as well is someone would like to ask about sports injuries and how to cope mentally when you can't run for a while.
Yeah, injuries are hard, and there's no getting away from that in one sense, so there's a reality check to the situation of, okay, so this has happened. So the starting point is to accept that it's happened. There's no point in going back and going, oh, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have got injured, or, well, I'd say there's no point to, that's useful in terms of preventing re-injury, but, that injury has happened. You're then looking at planning towards your rehab and using that as your focus. So your training is about getting back to training, so it's a readjustment of that. You may need to also consider things like, depending on the nature of the injury and how much impact it's going to have, about thinking about, well, has this had an impact on my goals for the event? So I'm still maybe doing it, but maybe I need to adjust what I was aiming to get out of it, and I'm not going to bounce back quite quickly enough to be able to do that. There's a normalization about it, in that very few people will get through training for something like this without any injuries. That will be part, or niggles at the very least, that part of that normal process. I kind of mentioned earlier, and you can use things like imagery to practice some things that are relevant to your race whilst you can't run. So you can be imagining yourself going along the route. You can imagine yourself running, and there is, if you get good at imagery, there's evidence around using it to increase the speed of recovery as well. So things like that, you can kind of increase blood flow to injured areas and stuff like that. But that kind of takes quite a lot of training to get to that kind of level of imagery. But yeah, so I would say it's a shift in a focus towards, right, okay, so that's happened. I would rather it had not happened and not ignoring that issue. But we're talking about that kind of rational and irrational thinking, and the difference between I've had an injury, that's it, my training's ruined, everything I've done to this point has been pointless, I'm never going to manage to get to the start of the race. That would be irrational, because actually there's not evidence for that. It's not logical, it doesn't follow. So you'd want to be switching that towards, so I've got injured, I really wish that hadn't happened, and it will disrupt my training, but how am I going to approach it now? What's the next thing that I can do? What's the best thing I can do to respond to that? And it might be about taking extra advice around that, that area, around the mechanics of it, from your physio, from, whoever. But really kind of focusing your training plan is then, my training plan is about getting back to my original training plan or an adjusted version of it. Okay, you want to tag in?
Yeah. There's not too much more to add to that. I think that one of the things that I would possibly add would be for every endurance athlete, and I work with endurance athletes quite often in triathlon, cycling, swimming, whatever. For every endurance athlete, I think that it's almost like the active participation in your rehabilitation as part of your training is how you need to see it. So you really need to be inclusive with your rehabilitation, inclusive with your recovery, so that is actually your training. That's what's going to bring you back. So you need to completely shift your perspective and say, okay, so what I've got now is recovery, rehabilitation. That's my training. That's how I get back to where I'm needing to get to.
Yeah, and it's taking control of that. So we were talking earlier about, areas you can control, and you can control your rehab plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can no longer control the injury happening, but you can control how you recover from it.
Yeah, and invest in that. And totally invest yourself in your rehabilitation, in your recuperation, your recovery, in the people who are involved in that as well, and the people who are part of your team, because you've probably got other people invested in the fact that you're racing. And you'll be thinking, oh my God, I'm going to let everybody down. Well, you're not. You're not going to let anybody down, actually. If you just work away at it, as Eleanor's suggesting, in most cases, you'll actually get to the start line and you'll get through your event. I suppose the other question would be, was the question about injury pre or injury during the event? That would be a different answer, wouldn't it?
I mean, I'd actually be really interested to hear on how your answer would vary if it was during an event, if you wouldn't mind answering that as well.
Yeah, I think in this actually, I'm referring back to the previous webinar where it was Ian and Kate who were the guests.
Yeah.
And one of the main things that they spoke about was being bothered. And with that, stopping. So being bothered, if you think you've injured yourself or you have injured yourself, be bothered about it and stop. You've got to review the situation. It's so basic. It's like your first aid basics. You, in a scenario like the Dragon's Back, you've got to go through the basics to begin with. Is this going to, by continuing, are you going to add to the injury? Is it going to become something that's insurmountable? What are your get out routes? Who can help you? How can you help yourself? Is there still imminent danger? Are you likely to add to the situation? So it's almost like referring to your kind of first aid list and process, as far as that's concerned, I would say.
Yeah, that's definitely a very helpful answer, I think, and sometimes something that people struggle to deal with. I'm certainly guilty of trying to run through injury and finding out it's not really possible. So what advice would you give to someone who spent a long time training for an event or something big, and then they've DNF'd or not had the result that they were hoping for, and now they're trying to find motivation to kind of move on to the next challenge, as it were?
Yeah, and that'll be quite a common scenario for a lot of people, I imagine. You know, not everybody's going to succeed the first time they try, or maybe even the second time or the third time. And so the first thing I would say is about reviewing it. So in a very similar way to, you know, how we were talking on each day, but probably a wee bit more extensive. But, you know, review why didn't you finish, or why didn't you get what you were looking out from it? Was it something to do with your preparation? Was it simply something that was outside your control on the day? You know, what was going on? Was it an injury? These sorts of things, so that you're learning from it. And then I would say start to use that experience as the platform to build towards the next one. So the DNF is not it's not a waste. It's not a, you know, you've drawn so much experience from everything that you did to get to that point, wherever that point was. You know, just to get to the start line is an achievement. So you don't want to dismiss everything you learnt on through that process. You say, well, actually, you know what? If I'm going again, I am now in a much better position than I was the last time, because I have all this experience to draw on. I know what went wrong the last time. I hopefully know how to avoid it, or I can accept that it was just one of those things that happened, and you know they will be there. But I now know more about maybe the course. I know more about me as an athlete. I know more about what I respond to in training, what works for me, you know, all these sorts of things. So really use that as, don't see it as a failure, see it as you know, a practice attempt or a, you know, a learning experience. That's you're so much in such a better position than you were the last time, because you know everything that you learned from that. I mean, arguably, the only way that human beings learn anything is by making mistakes and by failing. That's how we, you know, when you're a baby, that's how you learn to walk, by falling over a lot and working out what doesn't work. So effectively, that's what you've done. You've gone, I've tried, I didn't get to where I wanted to get to, whether that's the way you finished or not finishing. But I learned so much from that. Right, how do I apply that into this approach? And viewing it in that, kind of framing it in that way, that it was the learning experience and this is the one that I'm then going to apply the learning to, rather than dismissing it as, I didn't finish, therefore it doesn't count. You know, that kind of.
Yeah. I think summarise that, you could say it's almost like what you've given yourself is a new benchmark. You know, you've got a new benchmark now, and you can move forwards from that, because you hadn't done it before.
Or you hadn't done it that way before, even if you've done it before.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good way of looking at things. So I'm conscious of time. Shane, did you have some questions you said you wanted to ask as well?
Have you got any more questions from our viewers tonight?
Let's see. Oh, we've got one more actually.
Okay.
Someone said, so your statement on control and focusing what they can achieve. They struggle with this for long ascents, as in they find like the first couple they might be fine and like focusing on what they can achieve, but by the third or the fourth they just find it hard and drift into negative thoughts. And I guess, do you have any advice for that kind of thing, where you've identified this thing that you do just struggle with and find hard?
Vicky, do you want this one, or shall I go?
I would, to a certain degree, I would refer back to the training and the practice. I can see the question there, and presumably Christian is training on terrain which would be relatively similar to that which you're going to experience on the event. So I think that, you know, if you're able to sort of invest your thoughts in being positive on the first, are you able to work out what that feels like and why you're doing that. So you've got your first and second ascent and you're thinking, this feels fine. But if you can't replicate that on the third or fourth, is it simply the physical fatigue, or is it that you have actually talked yourself out of it beforehand? It's like really looking at where those thoughts are taking you, where are they coming from. If you can make it up one hill, you can make it up 2 hills, but by the third or the fourth, you're not making it up that one. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that.
Maybe I might add something to that actually as the race organizer. So I really strongly feel that like genuine sense of adventure and reward only comes when you have jeopardy, as in uncertainty in the outcome. So if you were to, the Dragon's Back, let's say, wouldn't be the Dragon's Back if everyone who started was going to finish. The very fact that it is hard is why you're there. So when you're struggling, when Christian is finding hill number 4 hard, rejoice in that process, because that is what you're there for.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that, and I've just kind of read it there, kind of getting more of an idea what he's talking about. But yeah, it's that of yes, it's hard. Okay, and that isn't thinking something is difficult or you're finding something difficult isn't a negative thought. That's a reality check of I am finding this hard. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either you can stop or you can keep going. That's your 2 options there. So you're then coming back to, well, actually, which of those 2 options do I want to do? Do I want to stop because it's hard, or do I want to keep going because it's hard? And that's feeding into Shane what you're saying of actually, I'm here to do something difficult. This is a difficult part of it. Okay, crack on.
Yeah.
And maybe you're not as fast up the 4th one as you were up the first one.
Yeah, up the first one. Yeah.
You know, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that again, it's hard. You would slow down.
Yeah. I think another thought on it would be the mountain is not out to get you personally. It's really not. So don't take it personally. And reflect on, as Shane's saying, reflect on why you're there, why everybody else is there as well.
Do you know, we've used the word a lot in the last 5 minutes. It's why. And 2 weekends ago, I was out with 3 of the volunteers from the last edition of the Dragon's Back, and we went out, and they're taking part in this year's, or most of them taking part in this year's event. And we went out and ran day 5, and we talked a lot about the why, and how if you want to have success at the Dragon's Back, understanding what your why is really helpful.
Important.
It's really helpful.
Super.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important.
It's the thing, if you imagine you almost have it in your pocket.
Yeah,
and you
wear it on your t-shirt.
Yeah.
Actually, wear it on your t-shirt.
Yeah. Or, I've seen recently little tags you can get personalised for your shoes, so you have your laces go through them with little, what's your little tagline that you want to see every time you're looking down at your feet. Yeah. And if we're talking, Christian, about ascent, you're potentially looking at your feet. So, that's where to have the little bit of self-talk to remind yourself there, of, why am I doing this? So, yeah.
Wow. So we've done 90 minutes, and that has absolutely flown by. I have personally thoroughly enjoyed that. I mentioned earlier about the pleasure of gaining the experience of the people we've interviewed in these webinars over the last 8-9 months, however long we've been doing them. Nearly getting on for a year, I think. It's been great. I think what I would maybe final thing to say is, and I'll ask Elanor and Vicky briefly to comment on this, is that there are on the website, Elanor has already shared the link to the kind of various packages of support you can get. I've personally benefited from some sports psychology help years ago, and it was great, really helpful. I suspect everyone who's sat here listening to this has gone, oh yeah, this kind of makes some sense. So, do you want to add anything to that in terms of?
Yeah, well, I'm conscious of time and people wanting to dash off and things. So just, the link's there, just to say that the way we set it up. So Vicky and I obviously work slightly differently in terms of, what we do, but each of us has different levels of package there, and they're designed as they're kind of discounted rates for people that are entering the race, so you're kind of getting a good deal there. But there's flexibility around that as well. So if you're saying, well, I'm not sure, we both have a kind of entry level one-off session where you can come and, you know, have a shot of it, as it were.
Yeah, have a
see
go.
what you think, and you're not overcommitting and things. And, you know, people who maybe are doing Dragon's Back and haven't, you know, engaged to this point, some of the packages would be almost too big to do between now and Dragon's Back. But if you said, you might say, do you know what, I want to run it through my whole year or whatever, you know, there's flexibility around them really as well. So what I'd say is, yeah, have a look at that link. It gives you all the details. If you're not sure, just drop us a line and we can
phone.
help. Yeah.
Send an email, ask.
Well, as I said, I would totally recommend it. It certainly made a big difference when I was probably running at my best a decade ago nearly now, and it was pretty good. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'd first of all thank Elanor and Vicky for their time and their expertise. It's really wonderful. My colleague Elanor for giving up her time this evening and not being out running and training. That's greatly appreciated.
You can't blame the psychologists for that. That's not good.
Oh, no.
I'm injured. I'm not supposed to be out running and training.
Okay, all the better.
And then, of course, our viewers tonight, thank you for giving us your time. If you are considering entering Dragon's Back or Cape Wrath, please get in touch. We're really happy to chat with you about those events. Perhaps you're preparing for Dragon's Back in 6 weeks' time. I'll look forward to meeting you in Conway. So I'll wrap up the webinar now. It's a bit of a brutal end. We just click leave and it all ends. But it's a pleasure to spend the evening with you. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.